On to the second review of this month, and as I've spoiled in the last review, is my favorite season of Kamen Rider. Kamen Rider Gaim. Kamen Rider Gaim is quite the special season, as it decided to go back to the story structure of Kamen Rider before Den-O. And almost every other season after Gaim decided to do the exact same thing. I honestly vastly prefer the style of flow for a narrative to the 2 episode structure, as it feels like it drags on for less time. Although it can still drag if done incorrectly. We'll get to that one day. The base premise of Gaim seemed pretty stupid at first glance to me. Dancing Kamen Riders based on fruit was just really dumb to me. Although what got me to watch this after O's was the hailstorm of praise the season gets, so I decided to see what the buzz was about, and well, you can tell what the answer was. We start the season with a weird vision of 2 Kamen Riders fighting each other with a whole bunch of weird monsters backing them up, and some characters. It's a neat looking opening to the show, but overall a bit weird to show off right here. More on this point later. Then we get the opening theme, Just Live More, which is admittedly a major downgrade from the last opening I heard. It's not a bad opening, as it does set the mood for at least the latter portion of the show, but for what goes on in the beginning parts, it doesn't fit all that well. While I've yet to see Blade or Hibiki, I do know they use 2 different openings once certain events take place, so I think the season could have used that approach as well, with this opening being the second one, while the first would be something much more upbeat and happy. I rank it as my 14th favorite opening out of the 22 I ranked on this list. I'll explain in a different review why I ranked it this way. Then we see our main character for this season, Kouta Kazuraba, helping out a little kid find his mom, and we get to see his philosophy on life during this, which of course ties into the themes of the season. Anyone can find the strength to fight, and it's a nice little scene, and then we get to the main gimmick of this season, which is the Beat Riders and the Invest game. People form up groups to dance and take over certain areas, and to take back areas from groups you fight them using the lock seeds. These lock seeds summon holograms of weird monsters that you use to fight, kinda like Pokemon, in that way I guess. And whoever wins takes the area for their group and is ranked accordingly. It's easily the least interesting aspect of the show, and is what gets people to not want to try out watching the season, and it's understandable if you are trying to get into the season in particular. But thankfully, this aspect of the show gets thrown to the background very quickly, as it turns into finding out the secrets behind those monsters in the Invest game, after the leader of Team Gaim goes to get a belt that can use the power of the lock seeds by a very strange man. He texts Kouta to check out what he found, and when looking for Yuya, the leader, Kouta and Mai, a friend of his, happen across the weird cracks that the Invest go out of, and inside is a forest with a whole bunch of weird fruit. And they run into a much more dangerous looking Invest. And while running away, they find the weird belt that Yuya bought. And the fruit they found turn into lock seeds. As the Invest gives chase to them and badly injure Kouta, he opens a lock seed and tries to use the belt with it, and successfully turns into Kamen Rider Gaim, or how they call them during the show, Armored Rider Gaim. I don't get why they went with that approach, but fuck it, who cares. Then as the show goes on, more of these people get their hands on the belts and use them for the Invest game, until a certain event that I will not spoil for people, as I use these reviews to get people into Kamen Rider. Unless of course you ignore when I put up those spoiler tags and watch through anyways to get yourself more motivation to watch it. Which isn't a problem in my eyes, but for Gaim, it's best if you don't spoil yourself on the events of the show because of what happens, and for you to fully enjoy this season firsthand while watching. Before moving on to the rest of the story for this review, I'm gonna go over the other aspects of the show that I'm ranking, although with minimal spoilers, as a lot of what these aspects are tie into the main plot of the season. So I'll give you a cursory glance for those aspects, and for the people that want to check out the spoiler sections, you'll see even more why I ranked them the way I did. Even in a section like this, I need to hold back, but mainly for my favorite song. For the OST, minus the opening, it's so fucking good. The battle themes used really work into the Sengoku style that was used for the season exceptionally well. EXA, Exciting Attitude, is such a great song that is sadly only used 3 times. Rise Up Your Flag is also a fucking bop used for one of Gaim's forms. And lastly, the best song in all of fucking Kamen Rider, Kiwami motherfucking Escalation. Or Rambu Escalation. You can go with either one, who gives a shit. Sadly, can't go into much detail about why I love this song, as it is a gigantic spoiler, so during the story section I'll mention the import of this song, but for now I'll just say, yes, it is my favorite song from this series. Only one song has come close to the magnificence of this, but that song isn't going to be talked about for a long while. As for the overall OST and where I rank it, it is ranked as my 3rd favorite. I still vastly prefer O's to the season, and the 2nd place for this barely edges the season out, but again, won't be talked about for a long while. Here we have another fantastic main rider. While I don't like him as much as AG, I still really like him. Kouta undergoes quite the arc during the season, although sadly can't go into much details here, as once again it ties too much into the story to talk about in a vacuum. I like his outlook on life and how he has to adapt to what life throws at him once that outlook is challenged. His growth during the season is very commendable without any real hiccup I can think of, although I still prefer other main riders as I feel they had a much better arc than him, but that's not saying much. Kouta is still a fantastic main character overall. I rate him as my fourth favorite writer.
Henshin.
Banana! Lock on! Come on! Banana
There are a fuck ton of writers here, and this isn't the only season to have a lot of writers involved, but of course, I'm just going to be sticking with ranking the main and secondary writers, and in this case, whoo boy! Kaito Kumon is one of my favorite characters in all of Kamen Rider. Character dynamics are always fantastic within the series, and this season is no different. We see throughout a large part of the early season Kaito's outlook on life being similar to Kota's, although a lot more severe. In his life, he saw the weak getting trampled by the strong constantly, and that put into his mind that only the strong can prosper in this world. Although, funnily enough, you'd think that he'd consider himself strong, but no. He considers himself to be very weak, but wants to obtain the means to be strong. It's an interesting way of doing this trope for a character, and seeing how he changes throughout the story and the conclusion to his arc makes for such a fantastic story. He is easily the best secondary writer in the series. Hoo boy, now for the main event, the story. And there was quite a lot to talk about in this section. While I did bring up some story events in the O's reviews, each of those events weren't immense plot points within the story, and well, there's quite a lot to the story, so I couldn't really say too much without having to make a big ass spoiler section for this video. Also testing out different approaches to reviewing these and wondering which you'd prefer, so I hope to find out how you'd prefer me to review stuff in the future. While more riders are entering the fray, Kouta and the gang notice some weird things going on with the world. From finding these weird flowers to then seeing the fruits grow outside of the forest. It all seems very weird, especially as they find a random rider inside the forest that promptly beats the ever-living shit out of Kouta. To try and find out more about this forest, Kouta decides to get all the riders involved to see what mysteries the forest holds. As they go further into it, they find Yggdrasil, the company that runs Zawame City, is also investigating the forest, but while disguised, Kouta hears the scientists refer to the riders as guinea pigs. They had been using the riders to test out the powers of the log seeds, thanks to Sid selling them to everyone, all while hiding this to the public at large. Then as the outbreak starts becoming much larger than normal, the riders are then blamed for all that has happened. And while Kouta attempts to tell the truth to everyone, other riders like Kaito give up trying to convince people. And then there's just Oren, who just joins up with Yggdrasil. But then there is Hase, who starts to go crazy after his belt was destroyed and ingests one of the fruit from the forest, turning himself into an Inves, which causes Kouta to try and save him and bring him back to normal. As this is happening, Mitsusane, another friend of theirs in the dance group, investigates inside of the Yggdrasil and finds a video that shows him the Invents they had fought before, where they were originally normal creatures and people, including Yuya, who was the first monster that Kouta killed. As Hase is killed by a new gaggle of riders, one of which is Sid, Kouta and Kaito are both captured and are brought to the creator of the Sengoku driver, Ryoma Sengoku. He tells them his role in all of this. He created the drivers in order for them to control the power of the Helheim fruit, and he wants both of them to continue helping him to see how much further the power of the driver can go. Of course, both of them refuse to help, and as both of them are put in a cell, DJ Sagara then decides to help Kouta escape with a keycard and a weird-looking lock seed. Mitsusane, who broke into Yggdrasil, then finds both Kouta and Kaito and they all escape. As Kouta attempts to figure out how this lock seed works, Mitsusane's brother Takatora, who was the one who was leading Yggdrasil's research team, then shows Mitsusane why they are hiding Helheim from the rest of the world, which gets him to join up with Yggdrasil to try and stop Kouta and Kaito from discovering what they had found. That plan fails, Kouta then enters back into Helheim and fights off Takatora, while Kaito fights off against Sid. As Kouta loses again, Takatora decides to show him the truth behind Helheim. It used to be a normal city, but when the fruit started growing, it turned all the civilians into Inves. Kaito also learns this information from Ryoma. Basically, Earth is going to turn into the Helheim as well. Hence why Yggdrasil had been hiding the Helheim from everyone, as they think they wouldn't come together to stop this. Kota still thinks he can bring everyone together in order for Helheim to be stopped, but then we have Kaito, who after learning all this decides to let Helheim invade to weed out the weak, as he believes the world cannot stand on its own if the secrets of Helheim are hidden from the public. Kaito then decides to investigate Helheim all on his own. As Sid corners Kaito, he then tells him more about Yggdrasil's plan. If the Helheim is too much to contain, they'd burn Zawame City to the ground. A big theme during this event would be, do the ends justify the means? Yggdrasil wants to protect the world from Helheim, but how do they go about it? Is it to lie to people and potentially kill off a large number of people to protect the world? Compared to Kota, who wants to stop Helheim from destroying the world but believes lying to people is the wrong way to go about it. Not too far off from how Kaito views these events, they aren't that much different from each other, they just go about it in different ways. That was something I love with stories, showing off the same perspective but in different ways, showing how different people would handle situations like these. Then we have another bomb to drop in regards to Yggdrasil's plans. As Kota helps him out in fighting some invest, he then learns of the final plan, Project Arc, which involves mass producing the Sengoku drivers that would allow people to be able to take in the energy from the fruit to feed them, although the issue lies in how many they can produce. Ryoma mentions only about 1 billion can be produced before the Helheim fully take over, leaving about 6 billion more people to die. Then as Kota runs off to destroy the Scalar system, in order for Yggdrasil to not burn down the city to the ground, he runs into Takatora and they fight once again, and as Kota tells him that you can't think that killing these many people will bring hope, he drops a bomb on Kota, telling him that he's already killed someone to bring hope, and shows him a video of Yuya turning into the Invest he killed when he first became Gaim. As Kota is reeling from this revelation, Kaito looks more into the Helheim after finding a weird-looking creature which Ryoma calls an Overlord. The Overlords are protecting something called the Forbidden Fruit, which can grant someone the powers of a god. You might be wondering why they're even trying to still go for the option of killing all these people. Well, Takatori actually doesn't know anything about this, while the other members of the Yggdrasil Riders, including Mitsusane, know, and plan on betraying Takatori once they get this power. Kaito then finds one of these overlords and promptly gets his shit kicked in. As Kota attempts to tell Mai what happened to Yuya, Mitsusane interrupts him and drags him away to tell him to never say what happened to Yuya in front of Mai, in order for her to not blame herself for his death. As Kota is still taking in all that had happened, the mysterious girl that talked to him all the way back when he got his belt appears and tells him to move past his regrets and continue going forward. He then wakes up and sees DJ Sagara, who tells him not to fight to protect the world, but to combat the premise of needing to sacrifice to give hope, which is what Kaito had been doing during this time. He then tells Kota about the overlords and how stopping them could lead to Helheim stopping in its tracks, and gives him a cool as shit lockseed in order to take down the Scalar system in order for Yggdrasil to never burn down Zawame City. I fucking love the design of the Kachidoki arms. This is the fucking big old DJ gun is stupid and I love it. After an episode developing a character who I don't give a fuck about, more on the cast after the spoiler section is done, Kota tells Mai what happened to Yuya in Helheim, prompting her to tell some of the other members of the Beat Riders about the Helheim, prompting Mitsusane to unleash some invest before Mai can tell a crowd of people about everything, and causing him to start going insane after Mai hits him for blaming everything on Kota. After that, Kota goes back into the Helheim to talk to the Overlords before getting interrupted. Kaito is also fighting off an Overlord with a new driver. As Kota takes care of the interruption, he attempts to talk it out with the Overlord while Kaito is still trying to fight, leading him to get away and for the two to start fighting it out, causing Mitsusane to shoot Kota in the back and knocking him unconscious. Mitsusane doesn't get away with it, as Kaito found what he did disrespectful and proceeds to kick the shit out of Mitsusane before he escapes, to prevent more of an ass whooping. We then get a flashback at Takatora and Ryoma talking about Helheim and how they could use this opportunity of finding the forbidden fruit to evolve humanity. This is before he knew it was indeed true. But Takatora just wants all the drivers to be sent to save as many people as possible. Just as Takatora in the present asks about the production of drivers, an overlord starts attacking the scientists in the forest, so he goes out to fight it, much to the disappointment of Ryoma. Kota also helps out and tells Takatori the truth about the overlords. Of course, Takatori is happy that he has another way to save humanity without needing to kill people, although that leads to him getting shot down by Sid and the rest of the Yggdrasil gang after he tells them his findings. Kota, during a delivery, runs into Kaito and Mitsusane, who had transformed into the form that Takatori uses, leading them to believe Takatori is betraying them. Sid then goes after the forbidden fruit alone, prompting Ryoma to ask Mitsusane, Kaito, and Kota to go after him as he destroyed Yggdrasil's only method of entering Helheim. We then see Takatora, who somehow lived getting shot down a cliff, don't ask, and runs into the leader of the overlords. Then we learn more about the overlords. They were the people who resided in this land before Helheim took it over. Once the leader of this place took a hold of the forbidden fruit, he took it upon himself to let the strong take over so they could survive while the weak were to be ruled over, leading to his people fighting each other, which led to the destruction of his world. As he asks Takatora if his people are the same, which we all know too well what the answer is here, the gang try and find Sid. Mitsutane runs into him and tells him a plan to take out both Kaito and Kouta. An overlord then interrupts the fight between them, and right as he is about to kick all of their asses, a crack opens up, prompting him to jump through it as Sid stays in Helheim to find the fruit, so Kaito and Kouta jump after him as well. One commercial elongated to be an episode later, seriously, I understand needing a more popular IP to advertise a lesser known IP that is getting a reboot, but it felt kind of weird to put an episode like that in during a big story event. Takatora has told more about the forbidden fruit and how it can change the world, but deems humanity as not deserving of it, as they would make the same mistake he had in the past. Then DJ Sagara shows up, saying how the fruit meant for humanity had already been taken by the king. The king wants to use both fruits in order to save his loved one that he lost all that time ago. As another overlord fights against Sid and Mitsutane, he gives up and shows them to the forbidden fruit. Then the king takes out the fruit for humans to then use some of its power to turn into a lock seed. He gives this to Sagara to give humanity one last chance to prove themselves. As Sid and the others go toward the king, Mitsutane figures out why this overlord brought them to the king. It was for them to weaken the king so that he could take the fruit for himself. Then Sid gets himself killed fighting the king. After Kouta got knocked out fighting the overlord, he is brought back to the Beat Riders' hideout to recover, while Kaito and the others try and subdue the overlord in Yggdrasil. Then Sagara meets up with Kouta to tell him how to fight off against the overlords, which is to become one himself. As this happens, the overlord that was with Mitsutane opens back up the crack for Yggdrasil to launch an attack on Earth. Kouta then agrees with the plan to become an overlord, and takes a lock seed made from the forbidden fruit. As all of the Beat Riders are getting their ass kicked, Kouta returns to the fight and pulls out the final form of Gaim, Kiwami Arms, which mops the floor with the overlord. Now that we finally made it to Kiwami Arms, it's time to rank it. Man, this final form is so fucking cool. Taking the power of all the lock seeds to use any weapon you want, as well as having a really sleek design, makes it among one of my favorite final forms. Along with having my favorite song in all of Kamen Rider play, Kiwami Escalation, which I already gushed about before, so I won't go into any more detail here. Also because I still need to talk about the import of the song within the story section of this review. There was nothing in particular about this form that I dislike. It still isn't my favorite final form, however. I just prefer two other forms, which doesn't mean much, as this form is still really good. So yeah, third favorite out of the 12 I've seen. Now back to the story. There isn't much left, don't worry. As the Invis are invading, the entire world now knows of their existence, which puts Yggdrasil into a bad position, but then Ryoma decides, fuck it, he tells the whole world about Project Arc, causing everyone to go into a frenzy. Now that Ryoma has gone off the rails, even lackeys from Yggdrasil decide to leave him, and the entire gang now has to evacuate everyone from Zawame City, as the Japanese government isn't helping them out. As Minato, one of the riders that works alongside Ryoma, and Kouta talk about how he's going to use his power and what he's going to do once everything is taken care of, as there's only one forbidden fruit left, and that he had to fight Kouta if he were to try and take it. They run into another overlord that is promptly taken care of until Mitsutane, still disguised as Takatora, fights against Kouta. He gets his ass kicked by Kouta again, but manages to escape before he's found out. You're going to notice a pattern here. One of the overlords from before then brings a message to the world about how he will open cracks all around the world, then other Invis start kidnapping people to power a machine to revive the queen of the overlords. Then to respond to the message sent out by, fuck it, I'll just start calling him by his name now, Regiue? I don't know how to pronounce that. Missiles start coming out towards Awame City in order to kill all the Invis there, which is stopped by the king of the overlords. After witnessing the power of someone with the forbidden fruit, Mitsutane then starts to go even more insane than he already was. Then Mitsutane confronts Mai and tells her his plan, and it goes as well as he think it would go. Then Mitsutane finally tells Kouta what he had been doing this whole time and proceeds to fight him. Takatora also reveals himself to still be alive to them, which prompts Regiue to take back Mitsutane to Yggdrasil to continue the plan. Kouta and Takatora run into Regiue and Mitsutsane respectively, and while Kouta is not able to defeat Regiue before escaping, Mitsutsane defeats Takatora, leaving him to die. As if that worked the first time. Another stupid tie-in later. Seriously, it wasn't even that long ago we got an episode like that. What the fuck? Who cares about this soccer shit? Mitsutsane starts losing it even more, seeing visions of his brother everywhere, telling him to get out of his shadow. Then, suddenly, Ryoma shows up and tells the Beat Rider gang about a secret entrance to get into Yggdrasil Tower so they could save the people captured. As they are weighing their options, Kaito and Kouta talk about Mitsutsane. Mai and him still want to save Mitsutsane, but Kaito then asks Kouta about the future, saying how he's not thinking of himself in those terms. As Kouta leaves while thinking about what his future will be, we see Kaito's wound from the Overlords growing much larger. I didn't mention that until now. Kaito had been hiding a wound that is slowly turning him into an Overlord. During a shopping trip, Mai is confronted by Mitsutsane again and is taken hostage. Kouta and Kaito are not able to stop him in time, and she is taken to Yggdrasil Tower, leaving them to take on Ryoma's offer. Mitsutsane then brings Mai to the King of the Overlords in order to try and show that humanity is worth saving. As Kouta and Ryoma reach Regiue, Mai learns a horrifying truth about the forbidden fruit. The holder of the fruit would be able to save the world, but it would lead to his own destruction. Kouta, while fighting Regiue, gets hypnotized and is shown how his life would be as an overlord, being feared by everyone and not being able to live a normal life anymore. It then awakens his resolve to fight, even if he is no longer human. After Kaito and the others rescue the captured civilians, they head towards the king to get the forbidden fruit. During the fight, Regiue kills the king to then see the fruit is gone. He fights with Kouta one last time, which leads him to also die. We then see that the king had put the forbidden fruit inside of Mai. Mitsutsane finds out about this and takes her with him alongside Ryoma in order to take it out of her body. Then, just because, Sakura reveals who he is. He is Helheim itself. His true goal is to evolve humanity. As Kaito's wound gets worse, he talks with Minato about wanting Helheim to consume the world, and she decides to stick with him until the end. As any shred of sanity left in Mitsutsane fades, he is given a prototype lock seed and heads over to Kouta to finish him off. As the battle rages on, Mitsutsane is able to kill Kouta, and the operation to get the forbidden fruit out of Mai is successful. Although he's betrayed by Ryoma, because of course he was. Then as the forbidden fruit disappears elsewhere, we finally get to see that the girl in the visions was actually Mai. As if that wasn't obvious enough. As she travels back in time to help fix everything, but is shown that she isn't able to change what was said to Kaito, Kouta, and Mitsutsane all that time ago. Kaito and Minato then confront Ryoma as they are overpowered by him. Kaito's wound gets much worse and he decides to eat a Helheim fruit, which finally turns him into an overlord. Ryoma is of course killed, and Kaito begins his plan to have Helheim take over the earth. Mai then is trapped for a bit in a parallel universe, showing that no matter what, people were going to be fighting for the forbidden fruit. Kouta's friends find his body and see that he had been fully healed. And after a long conversation with Mai, he now wants to try and change the future. She then goes to Kaito to change his mind and prevent them from fighting. Of course, that doesn't work. As Minato and Kaito enact their plans, they run into some of the Beat Riders, and one of them goes to join Kaito, although in reality he was pretending to betray everyone in order to stop Kaito once and for all. Zack, the guy that joined up with Kaito, who was also originally a part of his dance crew, sets up a bomb without anyone noticing until he is about to trigger it. Minato jumps in front of the blast and is killed in the process. After Mai fails to try and stop Kaito and Kouta from fighting, they then confront each other as the citizens of Zawame City are being evacuated, and this leads to the best fight scene in all of Kamen Rider. The choreography is just fantastic. Seeing how both of these characters made it to this point was just amazing to see, and the use of Kiwami escalation elevates this fight even further. The lyrics for the song were made for this moment. A back and forth between Kaito and Kouta as both actors actually sing the song as they fight for the ultimate power to shape the world to their ideals. After a long battle, Kouta is victorious and Kaito dies in his arms. Mai then appears and gives Kouta the forbidden fruit. He then decides to find a new world to inhabit instead of destroying everything he fought to protect. Then, 3 months later, we see how the rest of the gang is doing, including Mitsutsane, who is just hanging in the shadows as he has nowhere else to go. He then finds his brother in the hospital because Takatora can never die, and he awakens after a lengthy conversation with Kouta. Both him and Mitsutsane now attempt to right the wrongs they had caused in the world, slowly but surely. Then we have an epilogue episode that is ultimately meaningless because it ties into a movie that nobody in the show remembers, except for Kouta. It shows that Kouta did find a new world and Mitsutsane is then accepted by his peers once again, although I heavily disagree with this ending for him as he hasn't done much to atone for all the awful things he did. Seriously, fuck Michi. That was a lot of story to talk about here. For the rest of the reviews this month, they do go back to the 2-episode structure like so you won't see a long ass story section like this for a while. I love what the story turned into because, let's be real, the Invest game stuff would have been boring to have around for the entire thing. I love how everything was paced, and the arcs that Koto and Kaito went through were just amazing. It was a big risk to do this structure, as Kamen Rider seasons after Den-O went through that 2-episode structure. So to see them go back to the past and try this long winding story was a breath of fresh air for longtime Rider fans, although I didn't quite get that feeling myself as this was the second season I watched. But, I mean, looking at reception for the season, as well as, I guess, hindsight for myself after watching a lot of the 2-act structure shows, yeah, it's a breath of fresh air. Honestly speaking, I wasn't all that big on the cast for this season. I guess the issue was having too many characters and not trying to flesh out too many of them. Sure, I like some characters. Ryoma, Takatora, Zack was neat. Mai and Sagara were nice as well. But outside of them, and the two main writers, of course, I didn't really care for them all that much. Hase was a catalyst for the plot, so they couldn't really do much for him. Oren is the worst character in the show. Acorn Man writer, because I can't pronounce his fucking name, was also really annoying, and really only had one episode for him to grow. And it was alright, I guess, but didn't really help him all that much. Minato was just nothing. She was a nothing character. And Sid was in one note jerk off, but it was fine within his role in the story. So yeah, the problem here was that there were way too many characters and that they really didn't try fleshing out that many of them. Not like it downgrades the season that much, everything else about the show was fucking fantastic. Oh yeah, fuck Michi. So yeah, this season is still my favorite even after watching 11 other seasons. The story was way too good and was quite a departure from other Kamen Rider seasons, as I saw with watching other seasons that came out before this one. This is going to be my longest review for this month, as the other shows I'm looking at don't have as much story to talk about. Also because I've yet to mention it, and I know someone will, Gen Urobochi wrote this season, who has quite the reputation as a writer, specifically with Psycho-Pass, Fate Zero, and the show that shares a lot of similarities with Kamen Rider Gaim, Madoka Magica. So yeah, for the people avoiding the spoilers for this review, what you have in store for you does take after Madoka Magica, so do what you will with that knowledge. So which Kamen Rider show did I watch after Gaim? Well, I've already mentioned it enough with both reviews, so this was bound to happen. That's right, Kamen Rider Den-O, one of the most popular seasons of Kamen Rider, hence why I watched it as early as I did. So, see you guys next week when I will be reviewing the show that changed the structure of Kamen Rider for 6 years.